I'm going to do a very brief intro to Pathfinder. So if you've come to a couple of the other webinars, I'm sorry, you can drink a cup of coffee, but those that don't know us, I'm going to share a little bit of information. Richard's then going to walk us through the majority of the discussion. Richard, you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Richard Abbott. I'm the Managing Director of Creative and Strategy here at Pathfinders. I've been here 16 years, but 20 plus agency side in the industry. And I'd say I specialize in archetypal branding, have a great interest in brand semiotics and video as well.
Great. Okay, let's go ahead, Garrett, let's get started. So just to establish that credibility to the audience today, Pathfinders is a full service marketing communications firm providing omni-channel solutions and directions. And we've been doing that for over 40 years. Last year was our anniversary, so we're very proud of that. We have 68 wonderful staff members here at Pathfinders, and we take care of planning and strategy through implementation and execution for paid, owned, and earned activities. We are very proud to have been named Best Places to Work 2 years in a row. And this past February, we were named Small Business of the Year by our local chamber. So some fun things that we had happening this past year. So our key categories of expertise, these are where we focus as an agency at Pathfinders. And so within each of these particular categories, we know the audiences, we know the channels, and we know the activities that work to get your results. We help partners from startups to Fortune 500 companies. So our little map here of where our client partners are. So South Bend, Mishawaka is our home base. So we're about 90 miles east of Chicago, but our client travels take us from the West Coast to the East Coast and everywhere in between. Not so much travel right now, but hoping we see more of you one-on-one in the near future. You know, I'm often asked, how does an agency in a city you can't even pronounce, Mishawaka, have clients across the country? And the simple answer is relationships. We have partners that have taken us to 2, 3, even 5 different companies in their careers. And for me, that only happens with trust and a great solid relationship. So if one of you are on the call today or on the webinar, thank you. We appreciate your partnership very much. So if these are just a few of our client partners, hopefully those of you that are on the phone or at one of these companies and or those that are new to Pathfinders, these are brands and names that you completely recognize. So we're going to kick it off. I hope that that wasn't too self-serving, but wanted to give those who are new to Pathfinders a little bit of context about who we are and what we do. And so we're ready to go. And Richard, I'm going to pass the baton to you.
Thanks, Vic. So as Vicki said, as an agency, we use design thinking all the time. So whether that's helping our clients with product or experience design, but we don't have a lot of time today to go into much depth about the process. So we're going to keep things very high level. We know this is a big concept in a very short amount of time. So if you want to discuss this topic further, we're offering a free 30-minute marketing consultation with Vicki afterward. So she can walk you through the process and all we do for our clients in more detail. You can also, as Vicki said, download this presentation at the end at pathfind.com/design. So design thinking is an approach used for practical and most importantly, creative problem solving. It's based heavily, very heavily on the methods and processes that designers use, hence the name, but it's actually evolved from a range of different fields, everything from architecture to engineering and business. And design thinking is in fact how we got you to read these words on the screen that you see now in the order we wanted you to. So I would guess that 99% of you read the big bold in the center on the white, then went downward and then went all the way back to the top. So design thinking is a method of how we got you to read the words, even though the last thing you read was the first thing on the page. You know, monitor manufacturers, I love this example. They do not practice design thinking. I'm willing to, you know, they're not solving problems at all. And I'm willing to guess that many of you are looking at this very thing in your home office right now. And that's when you know design thinking is necessary. It's when consumers try to solve it themselves. And this is a surefire way to recognize that design thinking is needed. And I think if you were to look around your home office or in the world, if you open your eyes to that, you're going to see a lot of places where consumers are solving problems themselves. One good example of that is the Hippo roller that I'm showing here on the right-hand side. You know, the key to design thinking, it revolves around a deep interest in and understanding of the people for whom we're designing our products and services. It helps us observe and develop empathy with the target user. And that's our keyword for today, is empathy. This Hippo roller was certainly born from understanding and empathy. You know, many people may not realize that in third world countries, they lack the infrastructure to even access clean water. You know, on average, they're spending like 6 hours every day just collecting water. And many of them are walking in temperatures of 104 degrees. They're going through dangerous areas of drought, wild animals. They also have human threats, you know, all with this giant container on the back of their head just for a little bit of clean drinking water. Well, the Hippo roller was developed by two South African engineers who were called to action by what they saw and by the empathy they developed in these, by experiencing this in the wider water crisis in rural environments on their continent. Design thinking is it's a very iterative process, and it allows us to seek to understand the user, and most importantly, to challenge the assumptions, the things we think we know, and then redefine those problems in an attempt to identify alternate strategies and solutions that may not be instantly apparent with our initial level of understanding. That's why it's iterative. That's why you have to keep diving deeper and deeper. So to demonstrate this, how we need to keep looking for solutions that aren't there on the surface, I want to watch this video with you. This video does include sound, but the sound's not important. So let's take a quick watch.
मुंडी के गुस्सा में अंदर परोठा परोठा नहीं ऊपर से निकलते अच्छा नहीं नीचे से कर पड़े मैं यहाँ बस छोड़ घर में आए जल्दी नको कर तू
You guys are probably cringing right now, like when he took the head and lifted up the kid. And so what I want to do is use design thinking to help us free this little girl in the easiest way possible. Okay, so I'm going to give you some options in this poll, and I want you to choose the one that you think would be the easiest way possible to free her. Garrett probably has a little thinking music. So are we going to cut the bars? Or we can just bend the bars and pull them apart, call in the jaws of life, or none of the above? None of the above. Quite a few votes for bend the bars, a couple for cut the bars, and call for the jaws of life. But you guys have caught on, and you probably guessed it was going to be none of the above. And you're right, because the easiest way to free her from the bars is to let her free herself.
निकालो अरे हाँ मियाँ
What?
अरे कुछ दिमाग में
Skinny enough to walk right. That is something where you see that the easiest solution was not at the surface. The thing that initially we were blocked to the easiest solution to free her from the bars. Now, why were we blocked? That's because of something called schemas. And because of that, it often takes, as you saw here, a child to come up with the solution. The adults are blocked by their schemas. So what's a schema? Well, humans are we all naturally develop patterns of thinking that's been modeled on these repetitive activities and this commonly accessed knowledge that we have. These patterns that we form, these schemas, assist us in allows us to very quickly apply the same actions over and over again in very similar and familiar situations. And those are what we call schemas. So for example, we have a schema for dogs, right? that encompasses the presence of, you got 4 legs, fur, sharp teeth, tail, paws, and just a number of other perceptible characteristics that we bunch and package into a schema so we know that's a dog. And most importantly, when we see a dog, we know how to process the stimulus very quickly by accessing our knowledge and understanding of how to respond. But because these schemas are stimulated automatically, so it's instantaneous, so we can figure out, okay, that's a dog, it's barking, it's showing its teeth, here's how I respond, I run, whatever. Because they're so automatic, they can obstruct what might be a more fitting impression of the situation. And the schemas prevent us from seeing that problem in a way that's going to enable us to have a new problem solving strategy. And you saw that happen with the girl in the bars. All right, so now that we know that we have a schema problem, and we know that schemas can block us from finding new ways to solve these problems, I think it's going to be really easy for this group now to find the easiest way possible for me to free this truck from underneath the overpass. So what's the easiest way? Do we take apart that trailer box? You can see it's already pretty damaged. It's probably 80% taken apart on its own. Do we just kind of chip away some of the concrete above the truck? You can see it's really only stuck by a couple inches. Do we just tow it out, just like sheer muscle that thing out, or none of the above? There it is. Okay. Nice. Let's see the results there. All right, take apart the trailer box. That's a really good, that probably would be easy, but might take a couple hours. And then, of course, you guys are really on me. Well, I would say the easiest thing to do is deflate the tires and just drive it out. So that would probably be the easy solution. Very little damage, wouldn't take much time. Once it's driven out, you just pump them back up and away you go. So that is another example of schemas blocking us. So how do we get through the schemas? Well, as we said, design thinking is very iterative. It's also a very non-linear process. So this simply means that the design team is continuously using their results to review, to question, most importantly, and then improve on their initial assumptions. So, for example, results from the final stage of the initial work process, they inform our understanding of the problem. So we seek to understand at great depths the problem. Then they help us determine the parameters of the problem, what's actually happening here, what occurred, what are the things we're dealing with in order that can influence our decision making. They enable us to redefine the problem, so reframe it. And then perhaps most importantly, provide us with new insights so we can see the alternative solutions. Now you can start in the prototyping phase or in the design phase, or, it is non-linear, but traditionally you see that this what's happened as we go from define to ideate to prototyping. And with true design thinking, you do spend a fair amount of time on each part of the process, even as you double back. For us as an agency, we focus more on the empathizing with our audience and defining the problem. We spent probably 60% of our time on those two phases, but depending on the client and the ask, we may spend an equal amount of time on each phase. We also have done a fair amount of prototyping, especially when we're developing different mailers or catalogs, and we're trying to get you to, just like you saw in the early, read the information and process the information and solve your problem as quickly and as easily as possible. So here's the bottom line on design thinking before I show you a few examples. Design thinking is a problem-solving approach that involves assessing the known aspects of a problem, and then here's the key, and then identifying the more peripheral factors that contribute to the conditions of the problem and finding alternative solutions. So it most assuredly, 100%, I can tell you, if you use and enforce a design thinking process, it's going to help you improve user experiences. So here's a good example. I think he's a great case study is Michael Graves. That's the man you see off the left-hand side. Michael Graves is passed on now, but he was a great designer. But I would say he was not always a great design thinker. So he designed that very famous Alessi bird kettle that you see on the right-hand side. It is still the top selling tea kettle on Alessi's site, even more than a decade later. And he also designed many products for Target over the years. And you can see one of his toaster ovens on the left-hand side. So, but it wasn't until the last 12 years of Michael Graves' life that I think he became a great design thinker. And why do I say that? Well, because he was actually paralyzed from the waist down from a spinal cord infection with the last 12 years of his life. And he was confined to a wheelchair. And he always called himself a reluctant health expert. So what did he mean by being a reluctant health expert? Well, he reluctantly, against his will, had to experience for the first time in his life what it's like to live with a disability firsthand. And it was only then that he got the two key words, understanding and empathy, for what it's like to live with a disability and the problems that they faced. So what did he do with that information? Well, he went on to become a great design thinker, and he had some major, next slide, please, Garrett. He had some major design breakthroughs in the healthcare industry. So he completely reinvented the wheelchair, and you may have seen that wheelchair in hospitals. And it was one of the first ergonomically friendly wheelchairs for both patients, which is obviously very important. But another key ingredient that was always overlooked is the caregivers, and having to push a variety of different body types and weights. And he recognized that they were suffering as well. And he made sure that the design chair, his new designed wheelchair, accommodated both of them. He also designed a lot of hospital furniture, canes, as you see here, and then as well as some other accessibility items like tub rails that you see on the left-hand side. In fact, we were honored to develop all the launch materials for the Prime TC. That's what the wheelchair is called, along with our client Stryker, including the product positioning, the copy for all marketing materials, and all the photography for that job that's still in use today. So in this healthcare setting, you can see another good example here when you really empathize with your users and you define their needs and their problems, both unspoken and spoken, that's key. And then ideate by challenging assumptions and getting out of the way of your own schemas, and then creating ideas for innovative solutions. And then you test them and you learn, you test and learn. Great things are going to happen. That's going to radically change the user experience. And that's good for you because it's going to improve your business outcomes, guaranteed. This pediatric CAT scan machine that you see here is just one example of great design thinking, in my opinion, at play in healthcare. And
Richard, I always like to put in when you show this picture because it is a perfect example of design thinking. When my oldest daughter was just a toddler, she had to get an MRI. She's had probably a dozen of them since that first one, but the first one is always the most daunting. So I knew at the time a 3-year-old was not going to do well in the MRI tube. So to help Sarah prepare for what was to come, my husband and I figured out a way to build a tunnel using boxes and blankets and the couch at our house. And he put Sarah on a blanket and he slowly pulled her through the tunnel while I was trying to imitate the horrible sounds of an MRI machine. So, we did this probably a dozen times. I mean, Sarah actually thought it was hilarious and a lot of fun. So, by the time we got her to her appointment at the hospital, she did really, really well. Now, had the room looked anything like this when we walked in, I guarantee it would have been even that much more of an adventure than it was. But you know, so I just, you know, I guess that was the Holland attempt at design thinking, Richard. You know, if that kind of comes to play, trying to figure things out on our own.
This is a good example, certainly, of prototyping. And you change your prototype over and over again. But so yeah, it's, you know, I think that's a great example. Thanks for sharing, Vic. Now, to conclude, I want to walk you through 4 very specific and different examples of design thinking. One of them is in product design, one in experience design, and one in website design. I actually have probably 2 product design examples. So the first one is Nike Flyknit technology, which we're all very familiar with now. I bet I am as well. You're probably wearing some shoes. Some of you today are wearing some shoes that were born from Nike Flyknit's technology. And this was Nike's desire to, after understanding and empathizing with their consumers, they wanted to overcome this fundamental puzzle that's been facing footwear designers for the past dozen years. It's, you know, how can you create a shoe that gives athletes exactly what they need, where they need it, without adding anything that's non-essential to a design? Creating lightweight yet really sturdy athletic shoes has perplexed the footwear industry for decades. As I said, you know, as far back as the late 1980s, Nike was trying this stuff and experimenting with ultralight mesh. They even had a shoe called the Sock Racer at one point, but it just wasn't sturdy enough to provide the performance support for athletes. So this breakthrough was huge for them, and it was all born out of design thinking. The process led Nike's entire team to participate in this design thinking, including computer programmers and engineers, and of course, graphic designers, you know. And what they ended up doing was taking a knitting machine for socks and sweaters and completely re-engineering it, moving their schemas about what that machine was built to do, and re-engineering it to produce this upper part of the sneaker. Nike had nearly 200 prototypes, and they had years and years of data to work with to test and learn and test and learn. And they got that data from Nike's employees. They used Nike's employees for the past 10 years on these different uppers to achieve this breakthrough. And that was so they could stay connected and continually empathize and understand with who would be wearing this shoe. Design thinking for Nike is part of their culture, always has been, since the days of Steve Prefontaine and Bill Bowerman specifically. He's the coach at University of Oregon, the co-founder of Nike, who's obsessed with winning. And I would say he was such a model for design thinking, even since the early days when Phil Knight would bring back the Onitsuka Tigers from Japan. He was one of the first US distributors. And Bowerman would just tear them apart. And he'd look at the upper and he'd do science experiments, basically prototyping and trying to understand how his athletes could take these materials and make a better shoe for his athletes. And one of the things that was born from that was he would take the rubber from the Onitsuka Tigers and he would melt it on his home waffle iron just to experiment with different tread patterns. And if you look at the bottom of your Nikes, certainly some of the more common Nikes today, you'll see that waffle tread pattern today. That's how it was born, and it's all born from design thinking. This is the Flyknit races, the end result of all that design thinking. Now you see, you know, everyone's copied it, from Adidas to everyone. This shoe is a real breakthrough. It doesn't look like much, but it only weighs less than 6 ounces. It's extremely form-fitting, and most importantly for athletes, it has the strength to perform at the highest level, and that was what they couldn't crack. Eliud Kipchoge was wearing a prototype of the knit Alpha Fly when he became the first person ever in recorded history to have run a marathon in less than 2 hours. I don't think it's an official record. It was like 1:59, but he was wearing this breakthrough technology, and you can see that is the ultimate result, of all this decades of research in design thinking to break that flynet barrier and that marathon barrier. The next product example I want to show you of design thinking is this Whirlpool example. So Whirlpool was they were first to market with this new product called, they call it Precision Dispense Ultra. And what you're looking at here is a reservoir. This is one that's in the pedestal of a front load washer, but it originated in front loads in a different space. And it was a little blue reservoir that you would put 2 weeks worth of detergent in. And they had sensors and programs that allowed that detergent to get dispensed in just the right amount, at the right time, at the right temperature. And then you never had to, for 2 straight weeks, you did not have to add detergent. Pretty cool. And now it's in pretty much every machine, but they were the first. But what they did was, and that was born from design thinking, and it was born from focus groups, and they were really listening and empathizing. And they heard that their consumers just wanted to load the detergent and go. They didn't want to mess with it every single time. So they set out to make it possible. Well, here's where they dropped the ball. They didn't apply design thinking downstream. So it was upstream, but it should also be downstream, specifically in what they named the feature. And what happened here was the marketers on the team, they deferred to the engineers. And I'm sure many of you on the phone can empathize here, where the marketing kind of gets pushed out of the way. And it's like, oh, the engineer liked this name. I guess we better come out with it. And what they called theirs was Precision Dispense Ultra. So 3 words that you can barely define on your own individually. And then when you string them together, you're like, I have no idea what that means. And it wasn't until it was a year, they were on the market for a year. They were getting no credit for this. They weren't increasing their sales, even though they were first to market, and they were very frustrated. And they came to us, and they did recognize that one of the problems they had was in the name. So they came to us to rename it. So we took it through our design thinking process. We took it through our archetypal branding process. And after pouring through the research and the focus groups and continually reminding Whirlpool that you got to understand and you have to empathize, it has to become part of your DNA if you're going to solve this, we ended up recommending the name Load and Go. And you heard me say that phrase earlier, and that's because that's what the consumers kept saying and over and over to Whirlpool. I wish you just had a thing that I could just load this and go. It is now one of I'd say it's the cornerstone differentiator at Whirlpool right now. And if you search for a washing machine for Whirlpool, you're bound to encounter the name Load and Go, because they've turned it into a system. And now there's a whole bunch of different features that help you load and go. Before I leave the Whirlpool example, I want to show you that this is some of the design thinking that we kind of threw in for free, just as, and it was actually pretty quick, where we just said, Whirlpool, if you were true design thinkers, if you really empathized and understood with your users, this is the type of things you would be putting on your washers. And we wanted to show them how design thinking affects product design, just even at a very high level. So I'm just going to walk you through a couple of these because I know they're hard to see. The first one in the top left was actually born, this idea was born from a diaper bag that my wife and I used from Petunia Pickle Bottom. And it was a really cool diaper bag, very thoughtful. But the one thing it had was it had snaps. And whenever we go to change the baby or to, just access something in the bag, those snaps would wake up our baby. And we found that we weren't the only ones complaining about this. So a whole bunch of people had written to Petunia Pickle Bottom, and they ended up changing their design to using magnets instead of snaps. They listened to their users, they empathized, and they made a change in their product design. We were suggesting that Whirlpool could do the same. If any of you have a front load washing machine, when that thing locks, it locks with a kerchunk. And I think that was I think I mimicked that perfectly. And we said, that should probably close with magnets, or you got to find a new way, because a lot of when you look at the demographics, And when you listen to the psychographics, a lot of these are new mothers, and they're waking up the babies. They have to do laundry with a newborn in their hands. So that would be a good example. Next example, right next to it is, the worst part of doing laundry is folding. Why not just built in a folding table that you see at the Gap on top of the dryer, especially with a front load, when 60 to 70% of the front loads are not sold on a pedestal. They sit on the floor. So they're right at chest level. You perfectly just bang out your folding right there using this built-in tool onto the dryer. The one right next to that, when they are sold on a pedestal, so we're talking 40% of the sales, the pedestals are meant, they're just a little container, they're meant to hold your laundry detergent. And there was laundry detergent has changed, as we've seen. Now it's pods that look like candy with 3 different colors. And you've seen it in the news where kids are accessing these pods. We said, that's ridiculous. For 5 cents, look at the credit you would get if the pedestal came with a child lock attached. That is design thinking. That is empathizing and understanding your consumer at the highest level. And the last one I want to talk about is the one, can you go back, please, Garrett, is the one, the penultimate one on the bottom row. That looks like the backside of a machine. The sales cycle for washers and dryers is like an average of 8 to 12 years. Okay, so you buy it and then you forget about the brand unless it breaks. Then you remember the brand. Well, what if we did something to help you remember us during that 8 to 12 year cycle? Looking at the research, you're likely to move that machine twice during that 8 to 12 year cycle, twice. And moving a heavy washer and a heavy dryer is a real pain in the beep. So what we suggested was, hey, put a handlebar on the back that folds down flat and put big wheels. Because getting this thing even over one curb is a ridiculous strain. If you surprised and delighted them, you would firm up the loyalty loop between 8 and 12 years. You would constantly remind them that Whirlpool is here for you all the way through. We're not just here at the sale. We're closing the loyalty loop by using design thinking in a smart and thoughtful way. All right, next slide. Thanks, Garrett. So here's I love this example. This is a great example of experiential design thinking. It's not just product. You got to get that out of your heads. It can be experiential. It can be websites, as I'm about to show you. The Houston Airport, they kept getting an inordinate amount of complaints about the long wait times at baggage claim, okay? So to solve the problem, airport executives, they got together and they said, we need more baggage handlers. And so they hired more part-time baggage handlers, and the plan worked. The average wait time fell to, I think it's just 8 minutes. This is well within the industry benchmarks. 8 minutes you had to wait for your bag, but the complaints persisted. And in fact, the complaints got worse. So the airport executives were super confused, right? They thought they took action. They thought they listened, but they were blocked by their schemas. So what they did was they got into their consumer shoes. They did a thorough on-site analysis of the airport and the journey that you take from leaving the plane to your bag. And they discovered that it took passengers only 1 minute to get from whatever gate they were at. It took them a minute to get from the plane departure to baggage claim. But I told you it's 8 minutes, right? So that means 7 more minutes to collect their bags. 1 minute from plane departure and 7 minutes just standing there or sitting there like this guy, falling asleep waiting for your bag. So in other words, an overwhelming majority of their journey was spent just standing and waiting. So after discovering this, they decided on a new approach. They took themselves to design thinking process, and they came up, they got rid of the schemas, and what they did was they rearranged the airport slightly. So they moved the arrival gate a little further away from the main terminal, and then they routed the bags to the outermost carousel, essentially slowing them down. And what happened was it now took speeding up the bags, but slowing the walk. So now it took the passengers in that 8 minutes, they spent a total of 6 minutes walking, and just 2 minutes waiting. And what happened was the complaints dropped to zero, because it all comes down to that perceived length of travel, right? We have our unoccupied time and our occupied time, and people hate unoccupied time, especially when they're getting off of a plane. So much so that they hate unoccupied time, so much so that as humans, we routinely overestimate the amount of time they spent. So when they were asking them, how long do you think you waited for your bags? It was 36% more than they actually waited. People don't mind occupied time. So that's that time spent walking from the gate to the baggage claim. It feels so much shorter for us because our mind is occupied. We're looking around, we're looking at the stores, we're thinking about what's next, rather than the fact that they're actually waiting for their bags to get to them. And the last one I want to talk to you, we have just a little about 5 minutes to talk about the last one here. So this is a website experience, and you can most certainly apply design thinking to your website experience, preventing them with a smooth and a, most importantly, useful experience. You need to have a reason why your website exists, and then you need to find that out and optimize it. So in the case of our client, Anthony Travel here, this is their old site. And I think even they would admit to you, if they're on the call, that this was more of an afterthought, right? So they're the premier, one of the premier university and sports travel agencies in the country, but they never fully understood exactly how their customers use the site. What we found out was that, you know, when we studied users and we looked at the data, we ended up optimizing the front and the back end so users can find their event in seconds, instead of getting lost in this sea of events that don't pertain to them. Because what we found out in the data is that Anthony Travel will promote specific events, and if you, let's say your son or daughter is going to a soccer event at Disney World, well, that's all you care about. You're not shopping for other soccer events. You signed up for the singular event through Anthony Travel, and you need details on that, and you need led along the way about what's happening. So if you were to go to a page like this, you wouldn't even know where to find it. You'd be looking around at university travel, am I event travel? Am I I'm not university travel, you know, and then it's almost like they were trying to promote other events instead of helping you find your particular event. Now, there is a baby search function in the top right, but we found at the hotspots, no one was looking at it and no one was using it. So what we turned this into was, by focusing our efforts on the UX and the UI, we turned the whole site into a search engine. So this perfectly matches their archetype, which we talked about in a different webinar, of the caregiver. And this is innovations rooted in sound archetypal branding, and it's rooted in great design thinking. We also went through, I'd say 3 to 4, no, maybe 10 prototypes just to get to where we are right now today. And this is still the site that exists, even though we did this probably 4 years ago. Great design thinking is going to always foster engagement with your content. It's going to help you convert website visitors, and then most importantly, turn them into loyal customers. Now, this looks easy. This wasn't easy because they were not optimized to be a search engine. They had all the events, but they had to pour some resources into this, some time and some money. But it significantly, when we look at the KPIs and the metrics year over year, they have gone up since we did this redesign, and because it's rooted in sound design thinking and sound archetypal branding. And right on time, 2 minutes early, that concludes our 45-minute presentation, but we do have 15 minutes of time left for questions, so don't be shy.
Garrett, do we have any questions? You're on mute.
Yep, I'm just getting to them, feeding on them, and let's see, let's go back to this. All right, we do have, all right, a couple questions coming in here. So the first one, it really is, how do I get started on design thinking? is what I'm seeing here. And I think that's, well, hopefully answer this one. I think hopefully this webinar has helped provide a lot of inspiration in the fact that design thinking can really be applied to any challenge that you're experiencing. But really, it's as simple as defining the question or the problem that you're trying to solve, and then following that process. And if you think of, will you be good at this design thinking process at first? Probably not. But with practice, you continue to hone in and refine what works for you and your organization and how you can implement that. And that's really the whole point of this, is it's a framework that can be adapted by anyone to really solve any challenge that they're thinking.
And Garrett, maybe they could invite a couple of kids to the brainstorm.
It was a podcast too. One of my favorite stories of that aspect is how do you simplify your communicating? And it was I think it was one of the serials or with Adnan or something like that, where the attorney actually presented her case to a class of third graders so that they could understand her defense. And if they were not able to understand her defense, then it wasn't good enough for her. So she continued iterating and iterating with that audience in order to see that too. But another question coming here: for website or digital ads, what outside of low engagement may prompt you to identify an issue in the way something was designed? I can answer a couple of those things too, Richard. I think this would be a good one too, if you want to. You kind of talked about some of those things, and while engagement is certainly one of the metrics that you look at through in terms of obviously the visibility and the impressions that you get, but also the clicks and the view rates and things like that. But I think it's what we would kind of do is it's not just that. You're looking at the whole path, right? And you're looking at that front end, but you're also looking at, is this driving any conversions? Is this driving any activity on your site? If it's a website or a digital ad specifically, if it's not, it may be an issue with the creative or how something was designed, but it also may be the destination in which you're leading somebody to. If those different touch points and those interactions don't connect, or you don't follow through on the expectation you're setting, it may result in overall poor performance. So really, you're looking at the whole suite of data in order to kind of look at and see how something was designed. Another way we've used design thinking kind of help at the front end to that is that you think of the design process, and inherently you come up with options. So if we have an option that we think is good and somebody else thinks is good, what we've been doing is testing those options ahead of time, out in front, before they get deployed. And that's kind of a method of prototyping to see what works best for our intended call to actions. Richard, Vicki, do you want to add anything else to that question specifically?
Well, I think that was also even in the email webinar that you did, that test and learn in the subject line even. So, that kind of design thinking, can work at the smallest level or the largest levels.
Yeah, cool. One of the questions, it looks like, is this something that you use all of the time within your organization too? So great question. At the heart of really design thinking, it's about connecting innovation and creativity with human needs. And I think that's at its heart is what we do all the time. Do we follow the exact process that Richard kind of touched on at the very beginning every single time? No. And that's because some of the times the timing and resources just don't allow it. But and that's kind of the beauty of it, is it's not something so rigid that if you don't do it right, you can't be effective or successful. So you can look at different parts and use kind of the mantra that it involves and really apply those to the challenge that you're trying to overcome.
Yeah, I would say, and because it's a nonlinear process, like just start anywhere. Like we start sometimes, like Garrett said, we'll do a lot of prototyping. Certainly digital, it's much easier to prototype, but we've been known to, there's a couple years ago, we prototyped, we were doing just card design, business card design for a furniture manufacturer. And we played with a whole bunch of different prototypes, and what we ended up with was a flat card that with 3 folds, it turned into a chair that looked exactly like a chair they make. So we just kind of jump into any of these nonlinear But I'd say, like I said at the beginning, we spend most of our time on empathizing and defining. And how we do that when there's no money is there's 70 people here. We're consumers, and most of the time there's a lot of B2B here. A lot of people's parents own factories and such, and we have a lot of breadth and depth of experience that can answer a lot of this defining stage. So we'll do soft sounding research amongst ourselves just over and over again. And if we can't get access to consumers or to clients through through our clients, what we do is we just go find a way. One of the jobs we were doing with Whirlpool is we needed to walk in the shoes of someone who's receiving a new washer or dryer. So, or I'm sorry, in this case, it was a dishwasher. So what we did was we bought a number of them, and then we went to the house and like recorded it, and we watched the installation, and we saw who delivered it and how they unloaded it, and was it on time. So we just walked in those shoes, and we didn't get that access from the client. We just had to do it ourselves because it was important to figuring out the solution in a new way. And you'd say, well, Richard, you've had things delivered. Well, your schemas are blocking. You have an expectation of them to be 3 hours later. And if they weren't, you're like, you don't process that in the way that you process it, looking at it objectively and studying it over and over again in different ways. That was a moment in time with one deliverer, and we needed to see the breadth. So we not only did that for the installation, we also did it for repairs, and we just find a way. Another great example of this is we needed to learn all about the world of financial advisors, and we just made calls after calls and different types of financial advisors, and to fully understand the process, because we didn't have a ton of front end data. We had some, sure, but we often find there's just never enough. So you have to just dig in, and that for us is where we spend the most of our time applying our design thinking process, is the empathizing and the defining, and then prototyping.
Great.
Any questions?
One more. It's like it says sometimes identifying the problem or the innovation as what you're trying to solve is some of the hardest part. And I think what this person's probably referencing is that the rollers that you were talking about, Richard. I mean, how long has that been happening, where people are carrying water on their heads and their backs for a long distance? That seems like it's staring you right in the face, and it has been. And I think that's the part of innovation and things like that. But what are some of the questions that you can ask to kind of help you think of these projects? And I think some of the ones that we ask are how we start to identify different things or opportunities. And one of those is if I was okay, what would I try? What would I try to do if failing was not an issue at all? If I failed at fixing this problem, what would I try? And that can kind of help you free you up, free up those schemas that you may need to look at or go elsewhere. There's also kind of, if you look up at more of a procedural path of design thinking, there's often resources that say it really starts with putting the few words "how might we" in front of your challenge, so that it's how you structure it that oftentimes can help you get the best ideas and how solutions, and that makes it so it kind of opens it up to possibilities. It doesn't lean you towards one route or the others, or even make it more of a binary decision. So I think it's "how might we" kind of opens that up and kind of fosters some of those brainstorming ideas and mantras. I think there's some others that I have written down here too. If I had only today to change this issue, what should I do? I think that's a powerful one too, because oftentimes we can get in our own way. Our schemas can get in our way of thinking, and we overthink things. So adding that kind of time constraint and that sense of urgency to it can often help you break through different ideas to help you identify those projects, those innovations that you're looking at. So just some of the other things and kind of ways that we get going and identifying problems.
I would say, just to add, in the case of the Hippo roller, someone has to want to help.
Mhm.
You need to, as the client, you gotta want it, and you gotta want to invest in it. You know, if that population lacks the resources to access clean water, they also lack the resources to solve this problem themselves. I'm sure they have tried. And where they net it out by carrying it on their backs and the tops of their heads and learning to balance that in incredible ways and endure that, that's their solution. There's no other resource. They probably exercise design thinking for decades, and that's the solution. And it takes someone else to want to care and want to help and to remove their own schemas and say, well, I'm coming with these resources. What could we do with these resources? And that's what happened in the case of Hippo Roller.
Mhm.
So there's a want to apply this across your whole platform, from your website to the mail you send, to the digital ads you build, to the, you know, you want and need to seek to understand and empathize. Those are the two words you should take away from this webinar and say, how can I apply empathy and understanding to the services and the products that I offer?
Well, that was the last question. So we have about 5 minutes left that you can have before heading out. As we mentioned, if you see the screen there, we're offering free 30 minutes with Vicki. So I encourage you to take you up on that. And you can download the deck or share the presentation and the stories with anybody later this afternoon at pathfind.com/design.
Fantastic. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Richard. Thanks, Garrett. And stay tuned for the next webinar on our series on our website. Take a peek and get signed up.
Great.